Sophie Hébert, who also contributed to the organization with unfailing loyalty. The organization was in a neighborhood where there were many daily challenges. But everything that it did made a real difference in the lives of many people. I would like to express our gratitude to all of the volunteers, community partners, and others who supported the cause over the years. We hope that the legacy of Loisirs Saint-Vincent-de-Paul, Champlain-Gamache will continue to inspire other community initiatives in future. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We want to help the most impoverished among us to live with dignity.
The honourable member from Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, did you know that the heart of Canada's Filipino community is located in Winnipeg North? And that June is Filipino Heritage Month in Canada. So no matter where it is that you go in Canada, Mr. Speaker, members will be encouraged to be able to participate in a wide spectrum of Filipino hospitality. One of the things that you'll notice, Mr. Speaker, is it doesn't matter what kind of event you go to, you will experience hospitality, kindness, love, hard working. These are the type of things that you'll see that's embedded in our Filipino heritage community. Today, over 1 million people today in Canada are of Filipino-Canadian heritage, Mr. Speaker. That is something in which all of us should be very proud of. I would encourage all members to get out and promote Philippine heritage no matter where you live in Canada in the month of June.
It's me, dude.
The honourable member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Today, it is an honour to rise to talk about everything that Roger Barbeau has done. He lived in my riding, Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. He was an accomplished businessman working in the area of footwear, and he even founded a credit union in Saint-Émile in 1959. He spent a great deal of his life serving his community and promoting the values he cared about, along with his spouse Aline and his 2 sons, Blaise and Gervais. He was an eminent member of the Knights of Columbus for more than 55 years, and he embodied the spirit of fraternity and solidarity that underpins that organization. He showed great compassion and commitment to the principles of charity and kindness. He was a model for us all. He inspired people around him, thanks to his kindness, wisdom, and his ability to help those in need. Thank you, Roger Barbeau, for everything you did for us and all that you are. Your legacy will remain in our hearts forever.
The honourable member from Scarborough Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Probably got
Mr.
another
Speaker,
5 minutes of
Filipino
statements.
Heritage Month is just days away, and Filipinos from coast to coast to coast are ready to celebrate Filipino art, culture, and food. The Philippines Fiesta Extravaganza started in Scarborough under the leadership of Juan Canton and Philip Beloso, and this year is expanding to cities across Canada with fiestas this summer in Toronto, Surrey, Vaughan, Brampton, Lethbridge, Hamilton, Niagara Falls, Miramichi, and Montreal. I encourage my colleagues in these communities and all Canadians to come to their local fiesta events and other events to experience Filipino food, music, and art as we celebrate Filipino culture and 75 years of diplomatic relations between Canada and the Philippines. I was proud to sponsor the motion that made June Filipino Heritage Month in Canada, and I thank everyone that has taken Parliament's declaration and made it a month-long celebration. Mabuhay Canada, Mabuhay Philippines.
The honourable member from Winnipeg South Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Dr. Ian C.P. Smith was a tireless and passionate public servant for over 40 years. We lost this cherished member of Winnipeg's community recently. Throughout the course of his distinguished career, Dr. Smith received numerous accolades for his hard work, including the Manitoba Order of the Buffalo Hunt, the Outstanding Achievement Award of Public Service of Canada, and both the Queen's Gold and Diamond Jubilee medals. He was an internationally respected biophysicist, having contributed to Canada's reputation as a leader in state-of-the-art medical diagnostic devices. Under his leadership, the National Research Council's Institute of Biodiagnostics has garnered a reputation for world-class research. It has generated and commercialized new non-invasive diagnostic tools used in human and veterinary medicine and continues his cutting-edge research on the early diagnosis of cancer. Dr. Smith was an accomplished man both professionally and personally. He will be sadly missed by all who knew him, and his work in the field of biophysics will continue to have a lasting impact. We wish his family all the best during this difficult time and thank Dr. Smith for his lasting contributions to our country. Thank you.
Here. The honourable member from Kootenay, Columbia.
Probably
Mr.
another 5
Speaker,
minutes of
after
statements.
9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the hunger and homelessness. Salvation Army reports showed 75% of Canadians face challenges managing limited financial resources, poverty and food insecurity worse in every corner of the country.
Shameful.
25% of Canadians eat less so their child or children and other family members could eat. It's staggering. 26% of Canadians skip or reduce the size of a meal because they can't afford to buy groceries. I was just at the food bank in Cranbrook. I was talking with a young couple, their 2 children outside. I've known them for many years. They were regular contributors. They were embarrassed as they told me they were there, the food bank, to pick up some groceries for their family. The NDP Liberal government hiked the carbon tax 23% last month, driving up the cost for food, gas, heating, especially hard-hitting in rural Canada. Mr. Speaker, only common sense conservatives will cap spending, axe carbon tax, bring home safe streets and powerful paychecks for Canadians.
With all the NDP in BC, it's nice to see a conservative elected in BC.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to invite all my colleagues to join me tomorrow and others as we celebrate National Seal Products Day, which is normally on May 16th. Inuit and coastal communities across Nunavut, Atlantic Canada, and Quebec have relied on seal and seal products for subsistence and survival for millennia, and we continue to use seal for food, clothing, and historical ceremony. Seal Day is about recognizing and honoring historical, cultural, social, and economic contributions that seal represent for our communities and our people. It is a day when we can recognize and counter narratives about the seal that seek to legitimize, as these have devastating impacts on Indigenous and coastal communities. I support the industry, and it is a strong industry that has sustained people for many generations. We must continue to work together to ensure the economic viability of seal for all Canadians.
I didn't know there was a market for
The honourable
seal.
member from Calgary, Nose Hill.
After 9 years of this Liberal government, it's a cruel summer for Canadian pet owners. Life in Canada is now so unaffordable that the Calgary Herald just reported the following. Calgary animal advocates say that the increased costs of living, combined with the housing crisis, are forcing pet owners to have to make tough decisions between their needs and those of their pets. Shame. Animal shelters are overflowing, and Melissa David, founder of Parachutes for Pets, said that her organization is taking nearly 100 calls a day on average from people whose entire support network is their pet, but are considering heartbreaking decisions, like abandoning their pet because inflation means they can't afford them anymore. The inflation caused by 9 years of massive Liberal deficits and the ineffective carbon tax has led us to this place. At a minimum, the Liberals must cancel the carbon tax, the federal fuel tax, and the GST on gasoline and diesel between now and Labor Day. This would save the average Canadian family $670 this summer and could mean the difference between keeping their beloved furry family member or cruelly having to abandon it.
The honourable member from Red Deer, Mountain View.
After 9 years, tax and spend Liberals are jeopardizing all that Canadians hold dear. The family vacation was the one opportunity to enjoy Canada's great outdoors, a chance to connect with fellow travelers and to see the sights and sound of this great nation. Now, even a simple road trip is unaffordable as parents struggle with the basic necessities of life. A summer vacation is no longer an option for Canadian families. Families will have to pay $700 more for food this year than they did in 2023. Last year, food banks had to handle a record 2 million visits in a single month, with 1 million more monthly visits expected in 2024. In the middle of this historic cost of living crisis, this NDP Liberal coalition decided to hike the carbon tax by 23%. This is just one step in their plan to quadruple the carbon tax over the next 6 years, making everything more expensive at the worst possible time. This has to stop. Our common sense Conservatives can be trusted to axe the tax this summer and to give Canadian families the break they so desperately deserve.
Here.
The honourable member from Pierre.
Mr. Speaker, this week is National Accessibility Week. J'aimerais souligner.
I rise to speak to the remarkable contributions of people living with a disability and the organizations that represent them.
Persons with disabilities, advocates, and organizations work tirelessly to remove barriers. They ensure the full participation of more than 8 million Canadians with disabilities. It's by working together with the disability community that we've made progress. Avançons ensemble.
Together, let's move towards accessibility and inclusion for everyone. That's this year's theme.
Active efforts are needed from all sectors of society. We need this to reach a barrier-free Canada by 2040. I invite my colleagues and all Canadians to celebrate the exceptional work being done by so many. Let's continue working towards a more accessible and inclusive society, a more accessible and inclusive Canada. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
The honourable member from Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
If you can work, if you can pay tax, if you can serve in your armed forces, then you ought to be able to vote. Those are the words of UK Labour leader Keir Starmer just last week. I mention his statement because this week, here in Ottawa, young people from across the country are gathering for the first ever National Vote 16 Summit. The Vote 16 movement around the world is growing because the issues being discussed in places like this have a profound impact on the lives of young people. It's growing because the evidence shows that when young people are empowered to vote, the voting rate, the voter turnout rate rises, a hallmark of a strong democracy. That's why the Northwest Territories Chief Electoral Officer has recommended that the voting age be changed to 16 in that place, and it's why I tabled my bill, the Right to Vote at 16 Act, here in Ottawa. Mr. Speaker, I want to wish all the young people gathering in Ottawa for the summit a productive session. Thank you very much.
I actually agree with that. That's like one thing the NDP's ever said that I actually agree with.
The honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé.
I think that's actually a good idea.
Mr. Speaker, Louisville and Masquinongé has lost one of its most noted leaders, Yvon Picotte. He was a teacher, a principal,
Ryan, I
a
think
journalist,
like in Germany, for example, and in lots of places in Europe, you can drink at 16.
The MNA for Masquinongé in 1973.
So I think
and sat in the National Assembly of Quebec for 21 years.
In comparison to 18, I don't think your brain has...
of tourism, municipal affairs,
for example, I know one of my friends who was 16, full beard, big guy. When he was 18, he didn't look any different.
When he retired from politics,
I think his brain was developed already.
He became the director
I think he could have voted at
of
16.
an addiction center.
That's just my opinion.
In Lanoraie, and he was also the leader of Yamashish's RCM group. This is a business that hires people living with functional disabilities.
You can start driving.
He was also president of the Louisville Buckwheat Crepe Festival for 15 years. Mauricie is mourning someone who deeply cared about the place he came from. Thank you, Mr. Picotte. We will remember you.
The honourable member from Bay of Quinte.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are experiencing pain and anxiety as rent and mortgage payments have doubled after 9 years of this Prime Minister. Housing is a need, not a want, and yet OFSI just made a report that stated that 76% of Canadians are going to face trouble paying their mortgages. That's 34 million Canadians who have a mortgage, who live with a mortgage holder, who rent from a mortgage holder. Mr. Speaker, trust is a powerful word. It is an experience more than a statement. And Canadians are facing anxiety and pain and losing trust over this Liberal Prime Minister who can't take care of even the basic needs, housing, low taxes, and an affordable cost of living. Trust doesn't require billions, it requires action. And to make Canada right, we need change. We need a new Prime Minister who's going to restore trust, who's going to build homes for Canadians, and who's going to bring it home.
The honourable member from Cloverdale, Langley City.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's with a heavy heart that I announce my resignation as the Member of Parliament for Cloverdale-Langley City effective May 31st. I've had no greater honor than to serve for almost 7 of the past 9 years here in Ottawa. During this time, I've worked with many incredible MPs and senators across parties on numerous legislative priorities. I also work closely with colleagues at the provincial and municipal levels of government because many issues require collaboration between all levels of government. I'm proud to see our community south of the Fraser has grown over the past decade, but I've also gained a deeper appreciation of family. I'm so grateful to my wife Elaine and my children, Kai, Hattie, and Kaylani, for their love and support over the past decade as I pursued politics in Ottawa. And, of course, my condo cuties. As my time as your Member of Parliament ends, I am so thankful for everyone who supported me over these past 7 years, especially my staff and volunteers, but mostly thank you to the constituents of Cloverdale-Langley City for allowing me to serve you.
Here, here. Oh, okay, so 7 years. He's got his pension now, so as soon as he got his pension, he left. Classic living. All right, let's get Pierre for question period now.
Questions orales. L'honorable.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. After 9 years of this Prime Minister, he's not worth the cost of mortgages. 76% of mortgages will go up over the next 3 years, according to the federal office that keeps an eye on banking in Canada. That's after the Prime Minister promised that interest rates would stay low for Canadians. All this while the Bloc is voting in favor of $500 billion of bureaucratic inflationist centralizing spending, which increases interest rates.
So true,
when
right? So
will
true.
the Prime Minister cut, waste, and lower interest rates? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives don't really care about Canadians who are having a hard time paying their mortgages. And we know this because the Conservatives have refused to support our Canadian Charter for Mortgages, which is really something that will help Canadians. They oppose 30-year mortgages for first-time homebuyers. The only thing the Canadians are in favor of is cut, cut, cut. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
You want 25.
Cutting taxes, absolutely, Mr. Speaker. According to the Journal de Montréal, Quebec's taxpayers are being bled dry. Obviously, it's not a surprise to see that 75% of respondents to a Léger poll said that they're not getting their money's worth. The Liberal Bloc, meanwhile, wants to increase taxes. So why not at least accept my common sense plan to suspend gas taxes for the summer? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that the Conservatives don't have a plan. The only thing that the Conservatives understand is austerity. The only thing that they can do is cut, cut, and cut some more. They want to cut our plan, our dental care plan, which is very popular in Quebec. They want to cut our school food program. Once again, a very popular program in Quebec. And obviously, they're not going to support our plan for young children. Very important for Quebecers as well.
You're the opposition.
After 9 years, this Prime Minister, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, is not worth the cost of mortgages, 76% of which will become more expensive over the next 3 years, according to the federal banking regulator, OSFI. This after the Prime Minister said rates would stay low for long. But we know that his massive government deficits have driven rates up 2 percentage points higher than they otherwise would be, according to Scotiabank. So will he accept my common sense dollar-for-dollar plan to cap spending and cut waste to bring down interest rates so Canadians keep their homes?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we know the truth. The Conservatives don't actually care about Canadians who are struggling to pay their mortgages. And we know that because when we put forward something very concrete to support those Canadians, the strengthened Canadian Mortgage Charter, they refuse to support it. When we put forward a plan to help first-time home buyers with 30-year mortgage amortizations, the Conservatives voted against it.
The
fact is, the only thing these Conservatives know how to do is cut, 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 and the only Canadians they care about are themselves.
That's 5 extra years of paying for it.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we have voted against everything this Prime Minister has done to balloon the cost of living of Canadians, to increase food bank use by 50% over 3 years, to send 1/4 of all young people to the food bank in 3 months alone, 1/4 of all Canadians skipping meals because they cannot afford a home, a 38% increase in homelessness since 2019. 50 new homeless encampments in Toronto, now a total of 256 of them in the biggest city in the country. Why is it that the more they spend, the more Canadians hurt?
Here, here, here. The Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we will take no lessons from the Conservatives when it comes to supporting the most vulnerable Canadians. The fact is, when we formed government and when they left government, the poverty rate in Canada was 14.5%. It is now 9.9%. The Canada Child Benefit has lifted hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. The GIS helps 900,000 seniors. The only thing they know how to do is cut, cut, cut. Tory times are hard times, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
We know how to cut taxes, Mr. Speaker, and that is why we reduced poverty and had affordable homes 9 years ago when common sense Conservatives were in government. Since that time, housing costs have doubled, mortgage payments have doubled, rent has doubled. The number of homeless encampments in Canada is up by hundreds of percent. We now have 1 in 4 Canadians skipping meals because they can't afford the cost of food. Will the government finally stop the policies that make Canadians poor, get off the backs of the working people, and let Canadians keep their homes?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we know what the Conservatives really believe and what they really do. When this leader was in government, how many homes did he actually get built? 6, Mr. Speaker. Just 6 homes. We know what Conservatives do to programs that support the most vulnerable. Cut, cut, cut. We have put forward a national school food program, a dental care program, national early learning and child care. They want to cut those programs. We won't let them, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie.
That was ridiculous.
On May 10th, the Minister of Immigration met with his provincial counterparts. They announced a working group to deal with asylum seekers. Last Thursday, Minister Fléchette wrote to the minister because nothing has happened since then. I'll remind the minister that he had said that the status quo was no longer acceptable, except that since this meeting, it's the status quo. While our public services are having a really hard time, we have a working group that isn't working. Is there a working group? And when will they meet? And when are they going to deliver results? The Honourable Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to say to the House that the working group will be meeting in the upcoming week, but that doesn't mean that work hasn't been done upstream to get ready for those meetings. I spoke with Minister Fléchette this morning, and I'm looking forward to seeing the work move ahead because the status quo is not acceptable. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Since 2017, Quebec has welcomed more than 50% of asylum seekers in Canada, even though we're only 22% of the population. I'll remind the minister that
like ones that come from Mexico,
he denied this imbalance for months. He even suggested that the idea of having a welcoming capacity was not necessarily a clear idea. He has since seen the light And, you know, it's only fools who don't change ideas. So now, is he going to stop demonizing Quebec, stop trying to buy time, and finally make sure that this situation is fixed? The Honourable Minister. It's true, Mr. Speaker. We know that the Bloc Québécois doesn't understand the difference between capacity and desire to welcome. But we are going to work to make sure that asylum seekers are welcomed across the country. There are several provinces that are taking on a higher number, and that needs to be fixed.
From Burnaby South.
Mr. Speaker, it's difficult to find the words to describe the horror of what's going on in Rafah. Women and children were burned alive in tents.
Okay, Jamie,
they were told they were
chill.
in a safe zone, in a refugee encampment, yet they were burned alive.
Dude.
What will it take for this Liberal government to send a message to Netanyahu that what has happened is inexcusable? What will it take for this government to take actions to prevent this genocide from happening?
The Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, even in times of wars, there are rules. And the images coming out of Rafah are horrific, heartbreaking. Our position has been clear on Rafah, and we've been saying it now for weeks. Palestinian civilians do not have any safe space to go. The killing of innocent civilians is completely unacceptable, and the decisions of the International Court of Justice are binding. The level of human suffering is catastrophic, and that's why, Mr. Speaker, we need an immediate ceasefire.
See, she already had her talking points from the PNR. She had her paper
The Honourable Member
one.
for Burnaby South. The images from Rafah are horrific. Women and children have been burned alive. What will it take for this government to send a clear message to Netanyahu that what he's doing is inexcusable? What is it going to take for this government to finally act to prevent this genocide? The Honourable Minister of Global Affairs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Even in a time of war, there are rules to be followed, and the images coming out of Rafah are horrible. They're heartbreaking. Our position on Rafah is clear, and we have been clear now for weeks. Palestinian civilians don't have anywhere to go, and killing innocent civilians is completely unacceptable. The decisions of the International Court of Justice are binding. The level of suffering for civilians is catastrophic, and that is why there must be a ceasefire immediately.
Okay, let's get back to Pierre.
The Honourable Member from Calgary, Forest Lawn.
After 9 years of this Liberal NDP Prime Minister, hunger and homelessness are up as 1 in 4 Canadians are food insecure. It's because this carbon tax scam leaves Canadians with less money in their pockets, food in their bellies, and fuel in their cars. This Prime Minister and this carbon tax scam are not worth the cost. Conservatives are calling for all federal fuel taxes to be axed this summer so Canadian families can save an average of $670. Will this road-raging finance minister stop the road trip wrecking and implement this common sense Conservative ask, yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the only thing the Conservatives believe in is austerity. And the only thing they know how to do is cut, cut, cut. That's why it is no surprise that they would like to cut the carbon rebates that are putting more money back in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadians. It is no surprise that they want to cut a national school food program. It's no surprise they want to cut our national early learning and child care plan. Mr. Speaker, they have no real plan, but they're letting the country burn.
The Honourable Member from Calgary, Forest Lawn.
No doubt we will cut the carbon tax scam that will leave more money in Canadians' pockets. And she wants to talk about a food program. That food program has no food in it. The only thing these guys have been feeding over the last 9 years is the already obese government. What common sense Conservative governments are going to do is we're going to axe a tax for good. Why don't they just call a carbon tax election so we can show them how it's done anyways?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is incredibly disappointing to see the misleading information that the honourable member actually puts forward. It is very clear. 300 economists, the parliamentary budget officer, have said 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more money back. Our approach is one that actually addresses the existential threat of climate change, does so in a manner that is actually affordable for Canadians. And to be honest with you, his constituents should be asking him, I'm sure they are, why he campaigned on putting in place a price for pollution in the last election and now is actually taking such a hypocritical position.
The honourable member from Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Thank you, Speaker. I'll be sure and tell the people in my community that are suffering under this NDP Liberal government that a bunch of well-to-do economists and some tenured professors saying that life's never been so good. I'll make sure I tell them that. Speaker, common sense Conservatives have put forward this plan. We're asking the government to axe all federal taxes on gasoline from today until Labor Day, meaning that the average Ontarian could save about $600 this summer. When will the Prime Minister adopt our common sense plan, axe the carbon tax this summer so families can take their kids on vacation?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm glad that folks in this House are finally being honest. He's actually saying, Mr. Speaker, just ignore the facts. Ignore the facts. Make it all up. At the end of the day, 8 out of 10 families get more money back. Every reputable authority actually says that. It's only the Conservatives who campaigned on the basis of putting in a price on pollution, who've now changed their mind, have no plan for climate except to let the planet burn, would take the position like that.
What is with this guy? He's going to blow a gasket. How did he get this guy some ad
The honourable member from Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Speaker, the facts are food bank usage is at the highest level it's ever been, and that's because of policies by this NDP Liberal government. In fact, this summer, my community that relies on tourism is being punished because the Liberals refuse to reduce their carbon tax. Canadians can actually save money. In Ontario, approximately $600 from today until Labor Day could be saved if the Liberals reduce the tax on all gasoline. Now, Speaker, when will Liberals accept this and give Ontarians a break who just want a vacation this summer?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in the pandemic, the Conservatives wouldn't have been there for small businesses, people that were suffering. Their response to the challenges that are around the globe is to say to people who are suffering, let's pretend those issues aren't happening in our country, and we can help you out by taking away your rebate check. We can help you out by taking away dental care from a senior, taking away a diabetic patient's medication. Mr. Speaker, you don't help vulnerable people in a time of global turmoil by cutting their essential supports. You help them by standing up and standing behind them, and that's what our government does every day.
Senior dental care is just pulling teeth, man.
The honourable member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. After 9 years of this Liberal government and its uncontrolled spending, Quebecers are in a cost of living crisis and they really need a break. That's why we are asking for a federal gas tax holiday to make gas cheaper. For the holidays, you need a car to get around, but instead of supporting us, the Bloc prefers to follow the woke ideology of the Plateau Mont-Royal and thinks everybody should get around in the bus. Will the Prime Minister accept our request and give Canadians a gas tax holiday? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would invite my colleague to meet with economists at the University of Laval to understand something very simple. 8 families out of 10, when the price applies, get more back in their pockets than they pay for the carbon tax. The money from the carbon tax goes back to Canadians. Richer Canadians pay more. And medium or middle-class Canadians get more back than they pay. 8 families out of 10 get more back from the carbon price, and that's true across the country where the price applies.
He didn't say it this time.
The honourable member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, we know that, the minister seems to be getting ready for another university job after the election, but there's nobody in Quebec who gets a check in compensation, and the tax that we're asking them to cut, those are taxes that Quebecers pay, and they don't get money back from that. Will the minister accept a gas tax holiday for the summer to help Quebecers who go on holiday? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If my colleague doesn't appreciate economists from the University of Laval, well, there's economists across the country who will explain it to him. 300 across the country signed a letter confirming that 8 families out of 10 get more back into their pockets than they pay with the carbon price. It's simple. All of the money from the carbon price is returned to Canadians, and richer Canadians pay more. Canadians from the middle class and low-income Canadians get more back in their pockets, and obviously, it reduces pollution.
I'm sure we could get like 3,000 to sign the other way.
Then I have the honourable member for Avignon-Lamitis-Matane-Matapédia. Some think that Canada is too small to have an influence on climate change. On Thursday, Carbon Brief reminded everyone that since 1850, Canada is in the top 10 of countries that have contributed to climate change, and we're certainly not the most populous of those 10 countries. That makes Canadians most responsible for global warming per capita. However, Canada continues to increase gas production, particularly with Trans Mountain. Increasing gas production is being responsible for climate change. When will the Liberals stop it? The Honourable Minister of Environment Change. Thank you. I'd like to thank my colleague for her question, and I'd like to announce her that the climate scorecard gave us a mark of 70% in 2024 for our fight against climate change, and our greenhouse gases emissions went down by over 50 million tons, Mr. Speaker. That's the equivalent of taking 15 million cars off our streets. So we're getting there. We need to keep working to fight climate change, and every sector of the economy, all regions need to contribute to this fight.
I did some looking on Stephen Guilbeault, and he has a company that before he became a minister,
member for
and then he stopped when he became a minister.
Matapédia.
It gets all kinds of grants.
I'll remind the minister that Canadians are per capita the
millions.
Most responsible for climate change since 1850, according to Carbon Brief. Meanwhile, there's concern about the increase in infectious diseases linked to climate change in Canada. For example, a 1,000% increase in Lyme disease cases in Canada over 10 years. And public health is also worried that that mosquitoes that are responsible for Zika or malaria could eventually thrive in Canada. There's a human cost. So when will Canada lower its oil and gas production? The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind my honourable colleague that in recent years we've put in place clean gas standards, and the Conservatives voted against that. We'll continue with our price on carbon, something the Conservatives promised that they would do as well in the last election, but they've changed their mind since then. We have standards for zero-emission cars in Canada. By 2035, we want to see zero-emissions cars across Canada, and we will continue to protect Canadians from climate change. The Honourable Member for Avignon-Lamitis-Matapédia. Canadians are per capita historically the most responsible for climate change around the world, according to Carbon Brief, but it's not the same for Quebecers. While the average Canadian emits 21 tons of greenhouse gases per year, a Quebecer is responsible for 9.8. So that's less than half. Why? Because we don't create dirty oil in Quebec. But we're paying for dirty oil, like with Trans Mountain. So Ottawa is making us complicit in climate change. So why will the government not change its tone? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. I'd like to remind my honourable colleague that over half of the oil consumed in Quebec is Canadian. 360 million barrels of oil go to Quebec every day, Mr. Speaker. Yes, we do better than the rest of the country, but there's efforts to be made in Quebec as well. Nobody isn't affected by climate change. There's nobody who can do better than everyone else. We all need to work together to fight climate change.
The Honourable Member from Edmonton, Mill Woods.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the hunger or the homelessness. The Calgary Herald reports of a single mother struggling to feed her family. Edith said, I pay all of the important things first: mortgage, utilities, insurance, condo fees, and then feed the kids. If I have anything left over, they can do activities. She has resorted to feeding her family at the community kitchen. Mr. Speaker, far too many Canadians are in this sad reality. When will this government axe the carbon tax, give Canadians a break, and allow families like Edith to actually feed their families?
The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague for the question, and I take his concerns as being sincere, but it's ironic that he puts this question on the floor of the House of Commons just hours after a debate on his leader's bill, which proposes to cut many of the supports that will help people like Edith. They put forward measures that are going to increase taxes on home construction. Their plan includes billions of dollars in cuts to support communities that are dealing with homelessness. They plan to cut the very funds that build affordable housing opportunities for families in need. Mr. Speaker, the government will continue to make the investments that will support vulnerable people in their time of need. I invite the Conservatives to join us.
The honourable member from Edmonton, Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, it's actually their failed policies that doubled the cost of housing. We would cut carbon tax and allow families like Edith to actually afford to pay for groceries. And after 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the hunger or the homelessness. And according to the Salvation Army, 26% of Canadians are skipping or reducing their meals because they can't afford to buy groceries, and 1 in 4 Canadians are skipping meals so they can afford for their children to have food. Their out-of-control spending and the carbon tax are driving Canadians into poverty. When will they cut the carbon tax and give Canadians a break?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Communities and Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, it is disingenuous in the extreme for the honourable colleague to argue that the very measures that put more money in the pockets of vulnerable people are driving the concerns that they are experiencing now. Yet at the same time, he's putting forward a plan, standing behind his leader, who wants to make sure that we cut programs that are building affordable housing, to cut funding that's going to cities, to cut programs that are supporting vulnerable families, whether that's programs to provide affordable childcare, whether that's programs to provide dental care, whether that's programs to provide essential medicines to people in need. Mr. Speaker, it takes investments to support the vulnerable Canadians that live in our communities. We're going to make them.
The honourable member from Niagara Falls.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, Canadians are hungry and homeless. 2 million Canadians are now visiting food banks each month, and the Salvation Army just reported 1 in 4 Canadians have skipped or reduced the size of at least one meal because they cannot afford to buy groceries. In Niagara Falls, Project Share served more than 13,000 people last year, or 1 in 7 residents. Instead of piling on more taxes and making life more expensive, when will this NDP Liberal government axe the tax to provide the relief struggling Canadians so badly need?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Of course, 10 years ago, when the party opposite was in power, there were over 2 million more people in poverty. So it's a little bit difficult to take their protestations when they had the opportunity and they didn't talk about these issues. But I have a direct question for the Conservatives. When you're dealing with a senior, like a senior who this week will for the first time in 41 years get dentures in their mouth, a senior who has had plastic plates, that's all they have left to crush food in their mouth, I have a very simple question. Do they believe that senior should get dentures, and will they support making sure that she does?
The reason why that senior's like that is because you tax the shit out of them.
The honourable member for Rosemont-La Petite Patrie. It's picnic and barbecue season, and people are wondering what they're going to be able to buy to eat. While Quebecers are making sacrifices, CEOs are rubbing their hands, and money keeps pouring in, and they're laughing because they know the Liberals won't make them pay their fair share. And the Conservatives, forget it, they'd never touch their donors' profits. Will the Liberals finally admit what everyone already knows? As long as they're around, there won't be a break for people who can't afford to buy groceries. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker.
Oh, not her again.
Our government has a plan, an economic plan for fairness for all generations. We have a plan for fairness with respect to taxes. And that is why our government is showing with our plan that the wealthiest have to pay their fair share. And with this revenue, our government will help Quebecers in terms of dental care and help children across the country.
The honourable member from Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, a recent report outlines the devastating impacts of the climate crisis over the next decade. We can expect ecosystems collapsing, overwhelmed, and a scarcity of vital resources. And in the face of this, the Liberals...
The honourable member from Victoria, her microphones were working at the time that she started a question. I invite her to start from the top.
Oh, no. Mr. Speaker, a recent report outlines the devastating impacts of the climate crisis over the next decade. We can expect ecosystems collapsing, our emergency responses overwhelmed, and a scarcity of vital resources. And in the face of this, the Liberals keep breaking their climate promises. In fact, they're still allowing big polluters to increase their emissions. And the Conservatives can't even agree if climate change is real. The Prime Minister is meeting with his youth council. Is he going to be honest about how he is fueling the climate crisis and endangering their future?
This chick is wild.
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to correct my honourable colleague. Since before the pandemic, our emissions have gone down in Canada, and we have one of the best performance of all G7 countries when it comes to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions since 2019. But I would agree with her. More needs to be done, which is why we have put together the first ever national adaptation strategy, working with provinces, territory, Indigenous nation, municipalities to ensure that we are better prepared to help Canadians and their communities face the impacts of climate change, something, unfortunately, that the Conservative Party of Canada can't even come to mention.
The honourable member from Don Valley East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government presented Canadians with a housing plan that will increase the housing supply across the country. A core measure of the plan is the removal of GST off of new apartments, student housing, and cooperatives. Earlier today, the House debated the Conservative leader's housing plan, Bill C-356. Mr. Speaker, this bill would actually put the tax back on the construction of middle-class apartments. Can the Minister of Housing tell Canadians where the government stands on the Conservative leader's plan to reimpose a rent tax on middle-class apartments? Thank you, Mr.
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague for the question. I can just imagine the setting when the leader of the Conservatives sat down with the napkin he wrote his housing plan upon and thought, what can I do to address the housing crisis? Idea one, raise taxes on home construction. You can't make this stuff up, Mr. Speaker, but wait, that's not all. They also plan to cut funding for affordable housing. They also plan to cut funding for cities that build more housing, and they plan to cut the measures that are going to make it easier for young people to buy their first home. When you look at the Conservative leader's private members' bill, you won't find a housing plan. You'll find a disaster.
You've made a disaster.
The honourable member from Kenora.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the hunger and homelessness. Mr. Speaker, a recent CBC report highlighted the reality for people living in Thunder Bay. There, neighbours are having to share groceries and other essentials just to be able to get by. Now, realizing that Canadians are struggling and that their plan has received a failing grade from the Poverty Report Card, will this Prime Minister finally axe the carbon tax and stop his inflationary spending to bring home lower prices for all Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, I have a hard time accepting this question from a member who I respect and believe is here for the right reasons when he puts the question in a frame of homelessness, but is willing to stand behind his leader when he proposes to cut funding that serve homeless Canadians across this country. Mr. Speaker, I never hear ideas from the Conservatives about making more investments to support vulnerable people. I never hear ideas from the Conservatives that will actually result in more homes being built. It's cut, cut, cut every step of the way. They do not want to put measures in place that will help vulnerable Canadians. We absolutely will.
I invite all members, please. It's been a really pretty good question period to listen to the questions and to listen to the answers, and to please lend their attention to the honourable member from Kenora.
Mr. Speaker, the minister can try to deflect and deny as much as he wants, but the fact of the matter is, after 9 years, it's his government's policies that have caused hunger and homelessness to rise. Now, 1 in 4 Canadians are struggling to put food on the table. People are spending over 30% of their incomes on housing alone, Mr. Speaker. This is the NDP Liberal plan in action. How can they possibly believe that their plan is working?
The Honourable Minister for housing infrastructure in communities.
Mr. Speaker, he wants to talk about our policies on affordability. How about the Canada Child Benefit that puts more money in the pockets of 9 out of 10 Canadian families and stop sending child care checks to millionaires? Yet his party voted against it. Let's look at the change that restored the age of retirement to 65 from 67. His party voted against it. Let's look at the guaranteed income supplement for low-income single seniors increasing by up to $947. His party voted against it. Let's look at the student loan forgiveness measures for healthcare professionals that work in communities like mine. Their party votes against it. Every time they have a chance to help someone, they say no.
Hey, calm down, Mr. Fraser. The worst housing
the
minister
member
ever.
from Costa Bay, Central Notre Dame.
Mr. Speaker, this NDP Liberal government is receiving a failing grade in Newfoundland and Labrador. Back home, according to Food Banks Canada and its annual poverty report card, almost half are paying more than 30% of their earnings to house themselves. 40% are worried about feeding themselves. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the hunger and the homelessness. So will he listen to the premiers who begged him to axe the tax so that people can feed and house themselves?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, if my honourable colleague opposite really wanted to do something for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians and all Atlantic Canadians, he'd vote to pass the fall economic statement, because that would mean $1,430 to families of four in his riding. That means $2,160 to family of four in Alberta, $1,805 to families in Saskatchewan, $1,440 to families in Manitoba, $1,300 to families in Ontario, $912 to families in New Brunswick. That's how we help Canadians.
The honourable member from Costa Bay, Central Notre Dame.
Mr. Speaker, I find that a bit rich coming from my colleague from Long Range Mountains, who voted against Bill C-251, against the sealing industry, against the fishing industry, against the people in our very own riding, Madam Speaker, or Mr. Speaker. But you know what? Back to the matter at hand here. 45% back home have an inadequate standard of living. 35% have a severely inadequate standard of living. 26% are experiencing food insecurity. So after 9 years, while this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, who's not worth the hunger and not worth the homelessness, axed the tax and listened to the premiers of back home.
The Honourable Minister for Rural Economic Development and for Co-op.
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you what we do on this side of the House. On this side of the House, we support communities. We support businesses. So I'd love to know the member opposite's comment to the 181 projects that ACOA has funded in his riding that supported 64 businesses, 43 not-for-profit organizations, and he voted against every single one of those, Mr. Speaker. That's supporting businesses. That's supporting communities. That's what we do, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for La Pointe de Lille. While the Liberals were making headlines with their contradictions about French, last week the report from Quebec's Office de la Langue Française went unnoticed. Yet, guess which sector ranks first among Quebec's workplaces where it's hardest to work in French most of the time? The federal government. Yes, that's right. The federal government is Quebec's worst sector when it comes to Quebecers' right to work in their own language. Will the Liberals finally stop encouraging the decline of French in Quebec?
They want to promote
the
French, but they don't promote
President
English
of the Treasury
in
Board, Mr. Speaker.
Like everything's in French.
Our
Even
two
if you get a
official
parking ticket,
languages
it's in French. You
are
can't
a
even read
wealth for all Canadians, and we will continue to protect both official languages every time, every month, every year, Mr. Speaker. We have done so since 2015. Our government has been committed to promote both in French, English, and after 10 years of investments, the opposition, well, what are we going to do? We're going to continue to protect both official languages always, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for La Pointe de Lille. The federal government is the worst machine for anglicizing workers, according to Quebec's OLF, and the impact is catastrophic. Take Gatineau, where the federal government is the largest employer. Between 2016 and 2021, the percentage of people working mainly in French fell from 77% to 62%. That's a 17% drop in just 4 years. Quebec's fourth largest city is rapidly becoming anglicized with the complicity of the Liberals. I repeat my question, will the Liberals finally stop encouraging the decline of French in Quebec? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, thank you. My Honourable Bloc colleague has admitted something. He has admitted saying that he hates the fact that Quebecers are working right now and contributing to support the best country in the world, Canada, from offices that are located on the Quebec side of the river and on the Ontario side of the river. And Quebecers are also strongly contributing to make sure that we have a bilingual country that respects its official languages and helps to grow Canada. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-Les-Chemin-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, this Liberal Bloc government isn't worth the cost. The Bloc voted for $500 billion in appropriations because it wants to keep the Liberal government in power. Quebecers are sleeping in dumpsters, homeless, and hungry. And the Bloc is supporting the Liberals who are responsible for this suffering. Can this Liberal Bloc Prime Minister stop his out-of-control spending, allow Quebecers to live in dignity? The Honourable Minister of Public Services. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to remind my colleague that her leader created 6 affording housing units.
That's all this guy ever says. I'm surprised he said something different earlier.
Many in her writing in recent months opened. Does she agree with the leader that the dental health program doesn't exist? While in her writing, there are 9,000 seniors that have signed up for this in her writing and have been able to receive dental care for the first time in their lives. They're saying this regime doesn't exist. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-Les-Chemin-Lévis. After 9 years of this Liberal Bloc Prime Minister, Quebecers are living in unbearable misery because of this housing and homelessness crisis. The more the Bloc-supported government spends, the more the Quebec nation loses. The Bloc is keeping this Prime Minister in power. Can they start thinking of Quebecers instead of supporting the misery imposed on them by this Prime Minister? The Honourable Minister.
He's going to say this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My colleague is saying that people are having a hard time, but people in my region are also having a hard time when they try to understand that the Conservatives are saying that the dental health care system doesn't exist. But in her writing, there are 9,000 seniors that have signed up. Thousands of people in Quebec have been able to access dental care for the first time. You get even more confused when you hear these figures when the leader of the Conservatives is saying that this dental care system doesn't exist. The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Liberal Bloc Prime Minister, it's too much to take. The result, increased homelessness and empty stomachs. The Bloc, by supporting all the $500 billion budget appropriations, has amplified inflation, housing costs, energy costs, grocery costs, the cost of bureaucracy, and centralizing power. Mr. Speaker, going hungry and sleeping on a park bench has become the daily life for too many people. Quebecers are having a hard time, and is it the best the Bloc and the Liberals have to offer Quebecers? The Honourable Minister. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. When I see the Conservatives across the way with their hands on their hearts, Mr. Speaker, talking about affordability, what hypocrisy, Mr. Speaker. They have voted against the dental care program. They're against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They are ready to attack reproductive rights of women, Mr. Speaker, and deprive diabetics of medication. It is shameful, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from St. John's East.
Mr. Speaker, today the House is debating C-356, the Conservative leader's housing proposal. In the Conservative leader's bill, there is no mention of students, seniors, workers, and the most vulnerable in this country. Can the Deputy Prime Minister please tell Canadians what our plan focuses on? How we are working to create more affordable homes faster across Canada, and how the Conservative leader's plan will slow down builders.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank my colleague for her excellent question, because you know what? Here is what the Conservatives are actually proposing to do on housing. They want to eliminate the Renters' Bill of Rights and our plan to build more homes faster. They want to actually cut the infrastructure funding that municipalities need to get more homes built. And they want to put the tax back on purpose-built rental construction. They don't have a plan, Mr. Speaker. We do.
The honourable member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years as NDP Liberal government, Canadians are in trouble. On Thursday, we learned from an OSFI risk report that Canadian homeowners who renew their mortgages in 2026 will be facing a payment shock. What this means is that as of February 2024, 76% of Canadians are in jeopardy of losing their homes. After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, many Canadians are now facing the very real fact they will be losing their homes. These Liberals are just not worth the cost. Will the Liberals commit today to stopping their inflationary spending, to drive down interest rates, to make housing affordable, so that Canadians can keep their homes?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, as we have been making clear throughout question period, the only thing the Conservatives want to do is cut, and actually put taxes back on home builders. That's true. But when it comes to fiscal policy, Mr. Speaker, let me quote the Parliamentary Budget Officer speaking last week in the other place. Canada compares rather favorably on a debt to GDP ratio when compared to G7 countries. We are probably the least or second least indebted country. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are absolutely wrong about everything, including fiscal policy.
Very gently, I'd just like to ask the honourable member from Cumberland Colchester to please only take the floor when he is recognised to be. Sorry, did I say Cumberland Colchester? My Dufferin Caledon. My apologies.
Speaker, you can't even get the right.
Now the honourable member from Northumberland, Peterborough South has the floor.
Well, in the next election, we'll let Canadians decide exactly who is wrong. And if you listen to these Liberals talk about this, you would think they never had it so good. The truth, it couldn't be any further. The fact is we have tent cities from coast to coast. We have students who are living underneath bridges. We have workers who are living in their cars. You know what? If these Liberals won't listen to Canadians, if they won't listen to Conservatives, listen to your own regulators. Stop the spending, drive down costs, so Canadians can keep their homes.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there will, of course, be a next election, and at that moment in time, Canadians will be able to look at who has the record of stepping up and supporting vulnerable people. And I can say to you, the record of the Conservative Party of Canada in this country in standing up and fighting for vulnerable people, fighting for people who don't have homes, fighting for people who are in poverty is abysmal, Mr. Speaker, and that's just the plain facts. Every time they had a chance to stand up and fight for those that were in need, they instead turned to ancient trickle-down economics that don't work, and they'll try it all over again. People have seen the game, they know what's up, and I don't think they're going to buy it.
Look at the polls. People aren't buying what you're selling.
The honourable member from Peterborough Kawartha.
9 years of this Liberal NDP government, Canadians are hungry and homeless. In the Minister of Housing's own backyard, 10 people are going homeless every single week. 1 in 4 Canadians feel they don't even have enough money to live. Canadians are spending 4% of their income on housing, which under that Prime Minister has doubled. While 10 cities become normal and they gaslight Canadians and tell them they've never had it so good, Conservatives are fighting. So when will they wake up and vote in favour of our build homes, not bureaucracy bill?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague would like to talk about my community. I want to take an opportunity to thank the service providers at shelters like Viola's Place. I want to thank you to our partners at Cody's Place who are benefiting from a multi-million-dollar investment to build more affordable housing. I want to say thank you to the Antigonish Affordable Housing Society for partnering with us to build more units for vulnerable families in that community. But let's take a minute to talk about her community. She goes and shows up for ribbon cuttings for projects that we have funded when she voted against them in the House of Commons. It's important that our words match our actions if we're going to solve the housing crisis. I hope the Conservatives will do the same.
Sean Fraser, you are the worst housing minister we've ever had.
The Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Mr. Speaker, our government has introduced a plan to free up 250,000 new housing units by 2031 on federal, provincial, territory, and municipal Crown lands. The Conservative leader has debated his housing plan, Bill C-356, which would sell federal buildings to the highest bidder with no guarantee of affordable housing. Can the Minister of Public Works explain to Canadians how our plan to conserve federal lands will create affordable housing across the country? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My colleague is right to talk about affordable housing. Do you know, Mr. Speaker, how many housing units the Conservative leader built? 6 units only.
That's all this guy ever says.
We are building 8,000 units in Quebec. Fortunately, the Conservative leader, well, he would eliminate these 8,000 units that would be built. In coming months, we are going to establish a fund to make public buildings and units available to the community. I would just ask the member for Pont-Neuf-Jacques-Cartier to only speak when he has been recognized by the chair.
Member from Winnipeg Centre has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While Winnipeg Centre has among the highest rates of youth poverty in Canada, Resource Assistance for Youth Inc. Level Up Job Placement and Education Program has been placed at risk by the Liberals' funding delays. After 7 months of waiting, this has forced Ray to discontinue vital programming for youth and lay off staff. Shameful, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister restore the funding, save the Level Up program, and protect the livelihoods of marginalized youth during an affordability crisis?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member opposite for her advocacy for young people in her riding. I can tell you that the youth employment and skills strategy has been hugely popular this year across the country. There are so many programs that are looking for this funding to support our youth, to get them back into the workforce, and absolutely I support these organizations getting the funding they need to continue.
The Honourable Member from Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, while the number of people living unsheltered is up across the country by almost 90% since 2018, in my community it's even worse. The number of people living rough has almost tripled. A recent PBO report shows this government is investing less than 1/7 of what is needed to even cut the rate of chronic homelessness in half. This government seems to have billions to subsidize the largest companies in the country. When will they do better by those living unsheltered and commit the funds they need to close this gap?
The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague for his question and for his advocacy on behalf of the most vulnerable who call his part of the country home. With respect, we're going to make the investments necessary to support some of the country's most vulnerable, including by partnering with communities who serve homeless Canadians, but also by making the investments necessary worth billions of dollars to build out the affordable housing stock so people have a durable solution. There are no immediate solutions to solve the challenges that so many Canadians are facing, but consistent investment over time, as we have been doing and will continue to ramp up, is going to make a meaningful difference in the lives of some of the most vulnerable Canadians. Thank you.
Et voici prend fin.
And that brings us to the end of oral questions for today.
Il est 15 heures.
It being 3:12 p.m., the House will now proceed to the taking of the deferred recorded division on the motion of Mr. Blanchet relating to the business of supply.
I've already got a couple videos out on my channel if you guys want to go look at those from some committees this morning, but I'm going to get a couple more out in about an hour or so, and we'll be live again tomorrow, same time. So see you guys.